Welcome to the WanderLearn podcast. I'm your host, Frances Tapon. In this episode, I have Susan Alcorn, who has hiked the Camino de Santiago de Compostela 16 times via 9 different routes. She's also written 2 books about El Camino and written 4 books total about hiking. We spend most of the conversation talking about El Camino Primitivo and El Camino del Norte, but we talk about all sorts of other things, like what's some of the unusual paths that she's taken, how did she experience in 9/11, has she ever camped on the trail, how many pilgrims actually go on the Camino Santiago every year, what percentage are actually doing it for religious reasons, and what advice she would give to first-time pilgrims for El Camino Santiago. This show is sponsored by Tour Radar. They are sponsoring an amazing contest for WanderLearn listeners. All you got to do is go to tourradar.com/WanderLearn for your chance to win this amazing travel contest. Check it out. One more thing, there's a little bit of background noise occasionally during our conversation. We're sitting outside in California while we were recording this face-to-face. So forgive a little bit of the noise. Enjoy the show.
We've done 9 different routes of the Camino de Santiago. Actually gone back to do some of them maybe over a 3-year period. So as far as going to do Camino hikes, about 15, 16 times.
Have you ever done it backwards?
Have not walked back home, no.
No, in other words, start in Compostela, right, in Santiago, the final destination, and then actually walk to France or something like that.
No, a few people do that. Occasionally you'll meet someone on the trail who is going the other way. The signage, of course, is more challenging. But in the early days of pilgrimage, people, of course, had to do it both ways. They had to walk to Santiago and walk back home.
Right, and that's exactly right. I mean, there was no plane.
That's right.
Back then. You could take the mule back, I suppose. Walk there, take the mule back. But it was harder. What was the most unusual of all the different journeys that you took that was kind of the most off the beaten path? Because that path is El Camino Frances is really beaten. I mean, that one is well known and been trodden quite a bit. But you've taken some ones that are less well known.
Yes. Well, before I go on to the other trails and the greater difficulty of many of them, we actually were on the Camino Frances for 9/11. So if you're talking about interesting experiences, that was one. That was in 2001, and at that time, nobody had cell phones or internet connection, very much internet connection. So getting the news, even at that relatively recent date, was a challenge.
How did you find out?
We were sitting in a bar at lunchtime, and
where roughly? In the middle of the trail?
About a third of the way across.
Okay.
And we were having lunch, and all of a sudden it got very quiet. We looked at the TV, which is omnipresent in the bars, and we were seeing fire. And since that was September, we assumed, living in the West, that there were fires. They were talking about Washington, that there were fires in Washington State. But then we were seeing the Twin Towers and weird things happening, and slowly, it dawned on us what was going on.
Wow, that must have been. And then for me, I was hiking the Appalachian Trail at the time, so it was also in a kind of primitive setting where I found out 6 hours after the attacks when it happened. I guess you must have found it out a few hours later, Matt, probably as well.
Yeah, I don't really know what the time lapse wasn't very much. But we still didn't know the details, and of course we didn't have access to computers easily, and we can't read Spanish that well, so even the newspapers that came out later didn't have much info. And it wasn't until a couple of days later that we were able to get to a library with a computer and really find out what was going on.
Wow, amazing. Now, you wrote this book, Healing Miles, Gifts from the Caminos Norte and Primitivo. Tell us a little bit about what the book is about, because when I hear that, I think, okay, those are the unusual. Everybody talks about El Camino Santiago as if there's one trail, and that's completely false. There's 1,000 trails, and some of the more popular ones, the most popular one is at Camino Frances, but then the El Norte and Primitivo, they're 2 separate trails?
Right, they are. The Frances, of course, is the most popular. Then the route out of Portugal, the Porto, starting at Porto, is the second. And then
how long is that one? That's pretty short, I imagine.
That's just a couple hundred miles. Well, it depends on where you start, actually.
I thought if you start in Porto.
We started in Porto, but the requirement to get your Compostela, your certificate of completion, is just the last 100 kilometers.
Right.
So a lot of people start closer in.
Right.
The Norte is the third most popular, but it only has about 10% of the traffic that the Frances does. And the Primitivo is basically the fourth most used of the trails.
Okay.
The Norte and the Primitivo, many people start them at the same point in Irun, which is on the French-Spanish border, and go along until there's a place where the Primitivo starts heading south. But a lot of people continue along the coast on the Norte. So the Norte, if you do the whole thing from Irun into Santiago, is about 500 miles. The Primitivo, if you do just that section starting near Oviedo, is about 220 miles.
What kind of hiker or pilgrim would be best suited for El Norte versus El Primitivo, those two?
They both eventually go through mountainous territory, but the Primitivo stays higher longer. I wouldn't say that one is more difficult than the other. I mean, I guess the Primitivo would be, but to me it's just a matter of, it's still a matter of step by step, and I didn't find either one of them extremely challenging as far as elevation was concerned.
But what about amenities? Primitivo sounds like primitive, so therefore maybe they don't have as many amenities along the route.
Actually, the Primitivo is named that because it was the first of the Camino trails. At the time that the pilgrimage started to Santiago, most of Spain was still controlled by the Moors. And if you look at the terrain, there's a range of mountains basically north of the Bay of Biscay. And they kind of formed a natural barrier from what was going on to the south, where the Moors still controlled. So the Moors never really got as far north as the Primitivo. And there was a king of Asturias who really favored the Primitivo route, establishing a way that people could get down to Santiago without having to deal with any of the fighting that was going on elsewhere. So it was kind of protected. Anyway, that really was the first of the trails that started, hence the Primitivo. As far as accommodations...
So they really should have called it El Primero, not Primitivo.
True, maybe so.
Primitivo in Spanish means primitive, and so the Primero is primary or first, right? But anyway, so what do I know about marketing? So that's fascinating. I didn't know that the Primitivo was the original one, and El Camino Frances. I always assumed El Camino Frances because it's the most popular. I thought that was the original, but it came after, once the Moors had kind of been pushed back a bit.
Right. Well, there came out a guide came out not too long after the Primitivo started, which really told people more about the other routes. And so they just sort of went on to the other, what's known as the Frances today.
Right. Okay, great. And then what is I haven't even done the whole thing of El Frances because I took a turn into Los Picos de Europa and La Cantábrica, whatever that thing is called, Asturias, up in the north, kind of like in those mountainous areas. Kind of made my own route, but so I don't really know the Primitivo and El Norte. My question was, is there a section a major section in those places where the trail narrows to a traditional trail, like 1 meter wide, like you would see on the Pacific Crest Trail or the Appalachian Trail, these kind of narrow or in other places? Or does it stay kind of wide where two people can comfortably sit side by side, where you could practically drive a car through, as El Camino Frances was when I saw it, at least?
Mm-hmm. The trails, people often complain about the amount of road walking that you have to do on the Norte in particular. And that's a fact. In particular, as you're starting You are going through Basque Country. You're going through major cities in Spain. You're going through San Sebastian, Bilbao, Guernica,
which are beautiful.
Santander. Beautiful cities.
Yeah.
Loved it, but a lot of the time you are road walking.
Now, wait, there's two types of road walking. There's
That's true.
asphalt, and then there's dirt.
That's true. A lot of it is asphalt.
Okay.
But I also say, even when you're walking on a highway, it's generally a secondary highway, not a major one.
Right.
And there's often, you know how along a road there will be kind of a dirt area that's sort of worn, a little easier on the foot than walking along the road. But indeed, you are on asphalt a fair amount of the time. I can't really give you percentages, but I know that my feet certainly noticed it.
More than half the time?
People do comment on it.
More than half the time?
I would say more than half the time.
Okay, and this is for the El Norte.
The Norte.
What about El Primitivo, which you said was a bit more mountainous?
The Primitivo, I don't know what the percentages are, but you still are doing some road walking.
Okay.
But just when you get tired of that, you'll find a place where you indeed are going, solo up some hill or through some muddy stretches.
A single file trail? Or
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So that's where you can find a single file trail if that's what you're looking
Right.
for. But
More
you're gonna
of
have
it.
you're gonna have to endure still some road walking as well. Endure for those who don't like it. Other people love road walking because then they can just step aside and have a coffee or have a
Right.
nice, empanada or whatever they're serving up
Right.
there.
Well, that is also one of the differences between the Norte and Primitivo compared to the Frances. It does not have the same infrastructure that the Frances does. So there are not pop-up coffee kiosks like you're going to find as you get closer to Santiago on the Frances.
I remember I passed this little village and I found like a soda machine. Like, pop in a couple of euros and get your soda can. Woohoo!
Yes, we actually, on the Primitivo, found a place where there wasn't a shop or restaurant in town, but there was a little shelter of some sort, and they had all kinds of vending machines. They had some picnic tables. You could even buy your scallop shell if you hadn't already gotten one. So, yeah, but then that is sort of the history of the Camino also. I mean, the merchants, vendors supported the people that were walking the trail. So it's always had this commercial side.
Of course, yeah. I mean, in the Appalachian Trail also, there's a whole infrastructure that's been built up around the Appalachian Trail as of these last few decades as the trail itself became more popular. And the Pacific Crest Trail, ever since the book Wild came out, has also seen an explosion of interest as well. So, and then what does that do? That attracts businesses, which is all natural. They're coexisting. I mean, there's nothing wrong with them. There's pros and cons with such development. But what about, there's a trail I saw once that left out of Salamanca in Spain. I don't know if you've ever done that one. I saw one on a map. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Left out of?
Salamanca, Spain. That one.
I don't know all the names of all the different ones. We did do a southern route that came out of Granada.
Oh, Granada. Okay.
And
okay.
that's the Mazarab, and people
Okay.
jump on that at different places.
When people talk about El Camino, they're always talking about Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port, which is in France, just on the border of Spain, on the other side of the Pyrenees, and they call that El Camino. But really, you can start anywhere you feel like it. And some people start in Jerusalem, for God's sake.
True.
And so, what was the furthest you started? Was it around the Pyrenees, or did you ever start like in Le Puy? Or
Well, out of French come 4 major routes, starting at the north in Paris, then Vézelay, Le Puy, and Arles. And actually, the Le Puy route can be started back in Geneva, and we have done that. We have started in Geneva, walked to Le Puy, also walked from Le Puy all the way and across into Spain. So that probably would be the longest if you were to connect, the whole thing as one. But all those routes out of France are still about 500 miles.
And now for a quick commercial break from our sponsor. Do you want to take a life-changing travel adventure, but you either hate planning or you don't know where to start? Tour Radar is a trusted online marketplace that helps you find, compare, and book multi-day tours that will expand your horizons through life-enriching travel experiences. Just type in a region you've always wanted to visit or your preferred travel style, and Tour Radar will do the rest. And right now, WanderLearn listeners can visit Tour Radar for a chance to win an amazing travel contest. Every month, there's a new contest. Enter to win at tourradar.com/WanderLearn. And now back to the show. So Susan, what percentage of the people who are pilgrims are actual kind of religious pilgrims versus quote unquote spiritual people or people who don't really, I mean, true Catholics, I guess, or at least Christian, like real, they would say, I'm doing it for Christian reasons, not for quote unquote spiritual reasons. What would you say?
According to the Pilgrim Office in Santiago, when people come in to get their Compostela, and they answer various questions, and in 2018, 43% of the people said it was for religious reasons, 48% said it was for a combination of religious and cultural reasons, so that, that's 9% for cultural.
Wow. That's amazing.
But how you define religious?
Yeah, no, but
that's
I mean, stop and think about that. Here's a religious pilgrimage, because in fact, I just got another. About every week, I get an angry person writing about my article. El Camino de Santiago sucks. Some angry message I get from some pilgrim, and who says. And the last one I just got a couple of days ago was somebody yelling at me saying, this is not a hike. It's a pilgrimage. It's a religious pilgrimage. And I said, well, maybe for you, but maybe not for everybody. And now that I'm armed with this wonderful ammunition that actually the religious people are a minority, for God's sakes.
Right. It's really how you define it.
Defined by themselves, by the hikers
exactly.
themselves, the pilgrims themselves. 43% are doing it for religious reasons. That's a minority.
Right.
Which is stunning. I mean, compared to, let's say, if you had interviewed people 5 centuries ago.
Probably it would have been 99%. Well, then there would have been the people back then who were trying to do it in lieu of going to prison, or those that did it to get their sins forgiven.
I did it for not going to prison. I was just running away. The cops were constantly behind me. Why do you think I went to the mountains?
As far as why I do it, we do it, my husband and I do it because it's just always different, whatever trail you're on. We love the land, we love the food, we love the people. There's a lot of the cultural experience. And also there are great areas of natural beauty. So it just keeps drawing us back, and in part because we know that it's going to be a somewhat different experience each time.
I love statistics, so I'm just curious about. Yeah, I'm looking over your shoulder and looking at these other statistics you wrote down. What does this mean? Can you explain to me these numbers here?
Oh, the percentage?
No, this you said a total. Is this 327,000?
Oh, in 2018. That's how many people, 327,378 people came into the Pilgrim Office and presented their
that can't be that
said
high.
They had done it.
More than a quarter of a million?
But they aren't all starting back in St. John, 500 miles away.
Sure, of course not. But are they all coming for a Compostela?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah,
what?
they're checking in. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And not everybody does. Not everybody.
Of course,
goes
some people don't
that.
want to even wait in line. They're
That's
like,
right.
I walked away from Germany, but forget it. I don't feel like waiting 2 hours to get my Compostela. Thank you very much.
Actually, yeah, it's a huge number, and it's really growing leaps and bounds.
327,000 people in 1 year?
Yes.
Trying to get a Compostela?
Yeah. And recently I've been seeing things online, haven't confirmed it, but like 1,000 people a day are showing up at the Pilgrim Office.
Well, it has to be. There's 365 days a year, and therefore if you got I can't believe that.
Yeah, but not the same amount are not doing it in January that are doing it in
I understand.
September.
So therefore you've got to have like days when you have 2,000 people sitting in line.
Exactly.
I mean, really, this is crazy. I hope God's listening, because there's sure a lot of people who are going there. Okay, and then this is the percentage of people. 56% take El Camino Frances.
Mm-hmm.
And how many percentage take El Norte?
5.82%.
Okay, and Primitivo?
4.59%.
So roughly 5 each, for 5% El Norte, 5% Primitivo, and just over half take El Frances. And then obviously about 40% or so are taking other methods to get there, other trails, other paths to get to Santiago.
There is a website, the office of the Pilgrim Office in Santiago. I mean, you can Google Pilgrim Office in Santiago and find all kinds of wonderful statistics. It comes on in Spanish, of course, but you can translate and look up whatever you want. So you can find out, what the age difference, what the age brackets are, male, female, which is actually pretty much even, 50%.
And I imagine age-wise,
where they're starting from, what country they're from, all that kind of thing. Lots of wonderful statistics.
It's a super diverse trail.
Yes.
I mean, I don't think of any trail, long-distance trail, that is more diverse than El Camino de Santiago, period. I mean, Appalachian Trail, you name it, walking in the Pyrenees, nothing matches the diversity of pilgrims as El Camino. You've got all sorts of nationalities, all sorts of languages, all sorts of age groups, because it's easy enough that even people who are in their 80s can do it. I mean, if they really want to, right? Mm-hmm. You've got bikers, you've got hikers, you've got people doing it for religious reasons, non-religious reasons. That, I think, is the number one reason to go. And by the way, that's one of my main points of my article about El Camino, which kind of criticized it, was simply that, you want to go there for the cultural, the people reasons, more than you're going to go out to some wilderness hike. Because wilderness, at least from El Camino Frances, it seemed limited. But that's why I was so curious also to talk about you, is how much more wilderness you get from the other trails. I imagine El Norte and Primitivo, even though they have a fair amount of road walking, they still enter in, it feels a bit more rustic. Am I right? Or
it does, especially when you turn, for example, from the Norte and leave the coast of Bay of Biscay and those incredible beaches along the way, many of which are secluded and great and nobody there. So
can you camp on them without a problem? Or is that not legal?
It's not legal.
Really? Okay.
It's not legal. Few people do it, but it's pretty much, it is illegal.
Do you always stay in hostels yourself, or do you sometimes camp in the wild, outside?
We've never camped in the wild.
Okay.
A couple of times we've taken a very lightweight tent in case the distances are more than I can do comfortably.
Or what about
we've
if
never had to use it?
Really? And so you've never been not kicked out of, but in other words, not been admitted into a place because all the hostels are full?
No, we have never been kicked out.
Albergues, as they're called.
The albergues have become more crowded, so people are running into more problems. But it really depends on, what day of the week it is, who happens to be traveling through there at a given time, whether or not you're going to find a place. I mean, on Facebook, you'll see people saying, no problem. Other people are saying, it was really hard.
But I imagine, Susan, you have the luxury of being able to go slightly off-season, not at the peak, correct?
Right.
You've never actually tried to hike these trails right in the middle of July and August, which is, I think, the peak, right?
Well, in Spain, as in much of Europe, they get these huge long vacation times. So August is really vacation time for the Spaniards, and the beaches along the northern part of Spain are really popular. So there, like in Bilbao, San Sebastian, and so on, for accommodations, it isn't other pilgrims, it's the people on vacation.
Right, the beaches are really the ones who are taking the most spaces in Norte. But I guess if you would want to go, you'd want to go not in July and August, because also hiking in July and August is freaking hot in northern Spain, or anywhere in Spain, actually. Yes. It's, especially in the lowlands by the beaches, boy, it's got to be 40 degrees Celsius or more. Mm-hmm. I mean, crazy.
So we go April, May, partway into June, depending, or September, October.
That's brilliant.
No, so the weather's the best. It's not as crowded.
Yeah. Have you ever gone in the dead of winter where you're dealing with snow up in the Pyrenees? No, okay.
Have not.
Okay. You got to try that, Susan. No, but what is your next big... I assume you're going to eventually go back, or are you kind of like, I've done every single inch of this northern route in Spain?
Well, we've done all of that Norte and Primitivo. So in recent years, we've been back on another trail in France, the Vézelay route, and we have another 130 miles of that before we'll reach the St. Jean Pied de Port again.
Okay. You want to go back and do that section?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
So what happened? You did a section of it, and then you said, okay, we'll come back next year or whatever?
Actually, this will be the fourth trip because we've had limited time the last 4 years when we've gone over there. Okay. I'm sorry, it'd be the fourth time. So each time we've been there, we've done like 120 miles, something like that, 125. Okay. So we have another stretch to do, so we'll do that.
Okay, and then what advice would you give to budding pilgrims, people who've never done El Camino Santiago. You get asked this all the time, I'm sure. So besides buying your book, Healing Miles, but this is not really a guidebook necessarily, or is it? Is it like a blow-by-blow, like stay at this hostel, or?
Healing Miles is actually a combination. I always keep a journal while we're traveling, and then I come home and do a lot of research, trying to find out more about the culture and the history and that kind of thing. And I also do an extensive, probably the third part of the book is more of a practical, how to pack for an extended trip, how to find out information if you are one of those that wants to have your luggage transported, which you can do on the Frances easily.
We call that slack packing. Is that, what's the word?
Well, they don't use that term.
Right. But what do they call it? In America, I mean, that's what we would call that on the Appalachian Trail, or, a slack packing, where you basically leave most of your gear and somebody takes it forward for the next stop for the day, and then you just can go with a water bottle, basically, and some snacks.
I think that would be, politically incorrect in some Camino circles, because people are very adamant about hike your own hike and don't be judgmental about whether...
Slack packing is not at least in my ears, it's not a derogatory term. I mean, I guess some people might hear it that way, but it's not like you're a slacker. It's just that I guess maybe that's where it came from. But anyway, I've never heard of it as like, oh, God, you're slack packing. People just say it with pride. They're like, I'm going to be slack packing this section. I'm like, okay.
I understand. It's not a term that I've heard used on the Camino routes, but there are occasionally comments from people about how it's superior to carry everything versus others who are like, whatever you have to do or want to do, that's your own business.
Let's touch on some of your other books, Susan. You've written some other ones. Tell us about them.
The hiking books I've written were first We're in the Mountains, Not Over the Hill, Tales and Tips from Seasoned Women Backpackers. And that was because at the time that I was doing the John Muir Trail, I wasn't seeing other people of my age. I was over 45. So I thought, well, they've got to be out there. I'm not that exceptional. So I started interviewing women, and I put together that first book, telling about people's experiences. And then that led to, the next book was the Camino Chronicle book, which was about the Frances route. And then I wrote a book about Patagonia when we did the Circle route in Torres de Paine. And then this most recent one, Healing Miles, is about the Norte and Primitivo. And these last three have been a combination of my journals, history and culture that I've learned more about, the practical information, and it's really about supporting, encouraging, making people realize that, this is doable, as you said, if you're lucky anyway, into at least your 80s. I'm 78 now, and I don't see that I have to stop doing this at all.
Yeah, it's amazing. You're 78, and when did you first start doing this? At what age?
I first started backpacking when I was 48 to do the John Muir Trail, and then went on to do all of the Pacific Crest Trail in sections. The first Camino was 2001, so I was 60 at the time.
Wow. So you're kind of a late bloomer, but you've bloomed quite nicely. That's
Thank
amazing,
you.
Yes. If people want to find out more about you, Susan, where should they go?
We have a website, backpack45.com.
Why is it 45? Is that when?
Because when I did the We're in the Mountains book, I primarily interviewed women 45 of age and older. I didn't see why there weren't more people out there backpacking, and I thought, it's doable.
And have you seen a transformation on the trail where all of a sudden now women are out there in force?
That's sort of complicated because now I'm sort of part of the hiking community, so I know people of all kinds of ages doing it. And there's obviously a lot more ways to find out what's going on with all the different websites and Facebook and all that kind of thing. So I kind of know who the players are now. But I think I think the percentage, in fact, I read a few years back that the number of women doing the John Muir Trail at one point was slightly higher for women than men.
Wow.
I don't know if that goes back and forth, but as on the Camino, it's pretty even as to who does it.
So you have seen a transformation to some extent from when you started. It wasn't 50-50, El Camino.
I think that, well, on El Camino. I don't know that, I think the Camino, yes, I think the Camino has more evened out than it was originally.
There's a lot of old-timers, and I mean that not just in age, people who've done something for, let's say, they might be 30 years old, but their mentality is old-timers, because when I started when I was 20, it wasn't like this, and now all of a sudden it's so commercialized and overgrown and so many tourists, I hate it. You know, and they're 30 years old, but they're old-timers as far as their mentality, in my opinion. But do you, at the same time, lament and is there a part of you that's an old-timer that says, oh, God, it was so much better back then and than it is now, and that's kind of forced you to look at these alternative routes?
When I did the Frances in 2001, I had no idea there were all these other routes. But like any hiker knows, once you do a trail and start talking to people, you find out, my gosh, for every one I've checked off, there are hundreds more. So it really expands your horizons. Yeah. And so my normal thing is not to go back and do the same trail wherever I happen to be. I want to do different ones. I want to see different things. I feel very comfortable traveling in France and Spain and Portugal and, wherever else. And so I wouldn't keep doing the same trail just because it's in my nature to want to try different trails. As far as going back onto the Frances, when you end the Norte or the Primitivo, you run into the Frances before you get to Santiago.
Sure.
So you are back there in the most crowded part of the Frances.
Right.
But we knew that going in.
Right.
So it's going to be a different mood. It's like, okay, whatever.
Yeah. And the capacity they must have is astounding in order to deal with all the people who want to just do 100 kilometers and get their Compostela.
Exactly.
Well, Susan, it's been an absolute pleasure. You're an inspiration to many, including myself. I think I salute you for all of the hiking you've done, not just on El Camino and not just in Spain, but throughout the world. So thank you again. I hope people will learn more about you and buy your books. I appreciate it. Thank you for your inspiration.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.
And that concludes this episode of the WanderLearn podcast, where we explore travel, technology, and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we talked about, or if you'd like to comment on the show, or if you'd like to ask me a question, then go to wanderlearn.com and click on this episode. Tour Radar sponsored this episode and is also sponsoring an amazing travel contest for the WanderLearn audience. Every month, enter to win a new Tour Radar contest for a chance to win a life-changing travel adventure. To toss your name into the hat, just go to tourradar.com/WanderLearn. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember Tapon. That's my first initial and my last name. Tapon is the username I use on all social media. You can also get to my website by going to ftapon.com. And here's one more reason to remember Tapon. If you like what I do and would like to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/ftapon. That's where you can pick up some remarkable rewards for as little as $2 a month. And now, 5 quick favors. Number 1, subscribe to the WanderLearn podcast. 2, don't forget to download it. 3, share it. 4, review it. And then 5, sign up for my newsletter at wanderlearn.com. Our theme music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is Frances Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.